Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy, Gsluke, here with our DFS preview for this week's American Express. Gonna make sure you guys are ready to go, know everything you need about these golf courses to go out there, pick some of your DFS plays, also get to some of those outrights you may be placing to go out there and have yourself a week. So without further ado, let's go ahead, get this thing started. Let's first take a look at the golf course and some of our key stats to go ahead and pick our top plays. So first off, we've got shots gained approach, no surprises there, but in terms of our proximity buckets, it's gonna be a lot of wedges this week on sub 400 yard holes, and then a lot of long irons. The par threes for the stadium course are some of the longest on the PGA Tour, also have water in play, so you can see a lot of big numbers there. And then in terms of your par five scoring, which is important on the stadium course, two extremely long par fives, but also for the Quinta in the Nicholas, that's where you're going to get a lot of your birdie production. So if you want to look at par five scoring, I don't think that's a horrible idea this week, but in terms of your approach buckets, your proximity buckets, that's a lot of, 125 yards and in, and I'd say 175 yards and plus. These middle tier buckets may be slightly less important on a week like this. If we're going to have a winning score from 25 to 30 under, as of right now, the betting line is at 26.5. And on one book, it's just minus 170 towards the under on strokes. So something better than 27 under par. If we're going to see that kind of scoring, we're going to need guys that have the horsepower to go out there and get to that type of score. So during my course breakdown, I mentioned birdie or better percentage, probably the most important stat this week. And while it comes in at number 2 in my modeling, when you're talking about value plays, even just mid-tier guys and like your 7-8Ks, it's arguably your number 1 key stat. And then in terms of stuff maybe weighing a little bit less, you can't completely overlook putting at a quote-unquote birdie fest. Ball striking, especially in some of the more difficult holes, is where you're going to separate yourself and maybe win the field or go out there actually win the golf tournament. But putting also going to be a key fixture out there. Around the green, we've got some difficult around the green shots, particularly at the stadium course. We're looking at shots gained to easy conditions, which you almost always get here in Palm Springs. Desert golf, another way to look at some of the crossover courses. Shots gained no wind, another way to look at these perfect birdie fest type of conditions. And in terms of comps, they're not weighted very much on a week like this, but AT&T Byron Nelson, Mexico Open, Sanderson Farms, all three events that have similar approach profiles. And in the case of like the Byron Nelson, also incredibly easy scoring. So with that being said, what are some of our top outrights and top bets, DFS plays for this kind of week? Well, at the top of my list, I've got Patrick Cantlay, who is almost always a fixture on these West Coast events. At this event in particular, has also been extremely consistent with a T26 last year, actually his worst start over the last 5 years, has a 9th place, second, another T9 finish back there in 2019. In 2017, shot a 59 at La Quinta Country Club, so is used to going low out here in the desert, and frankly, at $10,800 is bringing a lot of consistency to the table, but also somebody I think could win this golf tournament. The main reason for that is with a lot of these finishes, he's had something go wrong. The only year where he was able to put all 4 stat categories together was back there in 2021, where he gained nearly 17 strokes to the field and didn't win the event, which for the American Express is very atypical, right? Normally something like 12, 13 shots gained is going to win this kind of event. That's just the case with a lot of these birdie fest kind of golf tournaments. He ended up finishing second that year, so it was a little bit robbed there in 2002. I believe it was the putter that went wrong for him, and then back in 2019 it was the approach play. So it's just been near misses, just one thing kind of holding him back from that success. Last year it was kind of a combination of the approach play and the putting, but that was just a 1-year aberration. And one thing I think kind of helps Patrick Cantlay, and we know he's kind of a slow player, right? He's been getting a hard time for it. He's got the pro-am aspect this week, right? He's got non-professionals in the group. They're going to be taking their sweet old time out there. So rather than feeling rushed like you think he has over the last 3-4 months, should feel right at home, right? So that's just a little narrative piece to drive it home. But this guy's been playing solid golf for quite some time. We take a look at the last 36 rounds from tee to green, has been special, right? Gaining 1.7 strokes per round. And surprisingly, right, a zeroed out with the putter, which normally we're used to Cantlay being one of the best putters on the PGA Tour, extremely streaky, right, capable of gaining well over a stroke per round. So now that he's back on the West Coast, at an event that really hasn't been that special for him in terms of his shots gained putting on the overseed, hopefully he can have a spike year, because if he does, with those ball striking stats that we've seen, it's a top 5 or a win, right? If he goes out there and has that flat stick. So I like Scotty this week. Going to be a huge part of my 2024. I made a little bit of a New Year's resolution to play more Scotty Scheffler. He'll be in my player pool. Might even bet Scotty Scheffler in a week like this. But at lower ownership, have to say Cantlay is probably going to be pretty average in terms of ownership for this range. I love it, right? 10,008 is more than a fair enough price tag. Sungjae Im's going to get a lot of attention because of his track record here. You can see he has like all top 18 finishes, so people are going to flock to that, I can assure you that. Xander Schauffele with the Albatross last year, right? T3 finish is number one in my modeling for this week. So not just for recent form, but even like just in terms of total model ranking. Xander's my number one play, so people will be getting there. Scotty, of course, right, is always going to get his exposure. So Cantlay, right, that normally, right, without these other big names here, might be like 30% owned at this type of event. It's going to be like 20% owned. So those are just some early ownership numbers. Hopefully they ring true tomorrow evening, Wednesday at 7 p.m. When we go on our live stream, right? We'll have all of our ownership up here. We'll be able to talk through some of the game theory up top. And I'm assuming, right, this is here on a Tuesday night, that we're going to get a pretty reasonably owned Patrick Cantlay. So for outright bets, if you can get like plus 850, I know a few books were hanging like plus 1,000 on them for quite some time. I would be running to the window to bet those. Unfortunately, on Hard Rock Bet, they aren't offering that kind of value. So I might have to look into some other type of markets to get some exposure on my boy here. Obviously in DFS, he's a core play, right? We're going to have plenty of exposure there. But I'd like to get some top 5 or potentially even some outright exposure if the number would dictate it. Next up, we've got Justin Thomas down here, who $9,800, he looks like he's back, right? And the main thing we want to see for Justin Thomas is the high birdie or better percentage, which in years past, last 3-4 years, he's routinely been in the top 5 of birdie or better rate. Last year had a little bit of a dip. The reason for that is the approach play wasn't around, right? He is one of the most electric approach players, very consistent at hitting greens, but most importantly, Justin Thomas, when he's playing well, sets up more sub 5-foot birdie looks than anyone else on tour. And there's a few databases out there that'll look at opportunities gained, even like opportunities gained plus, right, that are shots within 10 feet of the pin. If there's an opportunities plus gained, right, where you have pretty much gimme birdie looks, Justin Thomas is by far number one in the world. And it's why at these Birdie Fest, sometimes at no-cut events, I'm even looking to get to a JT. And if you look at his stat profile over the last few months, he's returned to being that elite level ball striker. So if we look at the last 36 rounds, you're still going to get some of that lagging data holding him back. But you can see here, right, 0.5 strokes gained with the approach play looks a little bit better over that longer term sample. But the more and more we zoom in on JT, right, the more consistent the stat profile looks. Starting to gain with the putter, right, gaining on approach and off the tee. And if you look at his last 3 or 4 events in particular, he's had events where he's gained over 4 strokes on approach. And that's the kind of JT that can win golf tournaments, right? That can go out there and win at a Birdie Fest. So I don't love the putting for him, right? He's $9,800, so it's not like he has to go out there and win the golf tournament. But because we're starting to get the JT that is an otherworldly ball striker, that brings a lot of upside to the table, right? When he's on his number one game, he's kind of like a Rory McIlroy. He's almost impossible to beat, right? When he's got those irons dialed in, he's making those short birdies. He is maybe the most explosive player that we have in all the world. So love that for JT. I'm a huge sucker for playing him. And now that we finally are starting to see those glimpses of greatness, I'm going to be a huge buyer there. And just looking at some of the ownership numbers, he's coming in at pretty average ownership for this range as well. So if we see him tomorrow evening at something like 15% ownership, maybe even a little bit less than that metric, I'm going to be a huge buyer on his prospects this week. In terms of our last core play here, we're going down here to the 8K range on a player that we seemingly talk up every single week. Eric Cole continues to be at the top of my modeling week in, week out, and continues to print us money, right? We've played him at high ownership numbers for the last like 2-3 months. I've played him every single time he's teed it up, and frankly, it's worked out extremely well. It is a T13, T14, T3, T2 finish back there, and I think it was either the Shriners, well, let's double check, right? It was the Zozo where he had a T2. Over at the Shriners, he finished in 3rd place. He hasn't let us down yet, right? And now looking at some of the ownership numbers, it's not like he's outrageously chalky this week. And if we take a look at the last 36 rounds, we can look at the last 12 rounds if we want to as well. He's doing everything we'd be looking for this week, right? With the approach play, has been dynamic with the long irons. Also pretty dynamic with the short wedges. The putting, nearly a stroke gained per round out there. And if we zoom in even more, some of these metrics are even more impressive, right? 0.8 shots gained with the approach, 1 stroke per round with the putter. Just he's everything we want on a week like this. And if we look at birdie or better percentage, he's also number 2 in this field, only behind a Scotty Scheffler. So I think that says a lot about his, birdie or better firepower. JT right up there, birdie or better percentage. Same thing with Patrick Cantlay. But in terms of points per dollar value, Eric Cole is playing like a 9-10K golfer and has routinely been 2K too cheap, right? He's posting all these consistent performances. I think at a certain point, and I've been on this train for a year now, right? We talked him up at the Honda Classic last year. It was the first time on the channel I went out there and actually put my name behind him. I'd been playing him a lot before that. I've played him like every single time since, and it's like gone wrong 3 or 4 times. Every other time he's come through. When are people going to realize that he's actually just a baller, that he's a damn good golfer, he's probably a top 15, top 20 golfer in the world? I think at a certain point, people are just going to have to, accept that Eric Cole's not just like some 7K golfer. So love him there. Number 3 in my total model ranking. He's going to get some ownership. He has for the last month. And frankly, I don't care, right? You could take some of these guys like an Eric Cole, maybe a Patrick Cantlay that are getting some ownership, and differentiate with your other 4 spots. It's not rocket science, right? We've been doing it for the last few months. And frankly, this week is no different. We're on the Eric Cole train once again. Before we hop into our value plays, I do want to say if you want access to everything you see on these spreadsheets, all the different modeling weightings over here in the key stats to get an exact idea of what I'm using in my projections. Over here from the DFS side, right, we got projected ownership going to be posted later on tonight. We got my player poll, points, made cut percentage, all of that uncensored over there on Patreon. So check it out if that's something you guys want access to. Of course, goes a long way with helping support the channel, all the content we're posting here, and gives you all of that easy to access info. Should save you time with your research process, give you a good idea for the types of players that I'm looking for in any given week, and hopefully guide your process a little bit on that end. So check it out if that's something you've been looking for. There's a link down in the description of the video. And again, different tiers for everyone. We've got DFS stuff on there, prop stuff for underdog and prize picks, NFL stuff here for the playoffs, all of that down below. Now for our value plays, where in terms of values, right, we're looking for guys that can make a bunch of birdies. But in the case of Steven Jaeger, not only does he have that birdie or better upside, he's got the long iron play I'm looking for. And, it's not that long iron play is mostly for the stadium course. I'd say La Quinta, Nicholas course, you don't have nearly as difficult, iron shots. But for 2 of the 4 rounds, Steven Jaeger is going to be tearing apart those par 3s. Is one of the best par 5 players that we have on the PGA Tour. And at $7,900, his ownership is actually relatively low for this range. You have people playing Taylor Pendrith after his solid week, right? Beau Hossler, I love this week too, and I'll definitely be playing him. Was almost one of the value plays I put in this video. Also going to be drawing away some ownership. Up here in the 8K range, people are in love with Taylor Montgomery now, which I kind of get, right? It's just high pedigree type of player. So Steven Jaeger on most slates, I'd say most times we get him at this kind of golf course, might be like 15% owned. Doesn't look like we're going to get that this time around. So for DFS, you got to like that. Not a different, leverage play. Not going to give you a bunch of differentiation, but definitely not going to, tank your lineup when it comes to getting different too. So a few things I like with Steven Jaeger. If we take a look at the last 36 rounds, you'll see that he's been pretty consistent across the board. The only place he's going to lose is on the greens, which is pretty typical for Steven Jaeger. But if we zoom in on the last 12 measured rounds, you see it holds up, right? Still gaining from tee to green, slight loser with the putter out there, just almost always on brand. And kind of like with JT, right? You don't love the putter with JT, right? He's actually a loser out here on this, POA overseed. You're hoping that these guys can just set up so many sub 5-foot birdie looks that's how they go out there and get to like 25 under par. So we don't need Jaeger to win. We're not going to need JT to go out there and win either. But in the DFS format, right, where top 5, top 10 will get the job done, I think they bring even more upside to the table. So I love that for him. He's starting on the Nicklaus tournament course. I know I'm going to get a bunch of questions on our Wednesday live stream about whether the starting course matters. To me, it does not. It's hard to even try and find a weather edge. It looks like it's going to be perfect weather all 3 days. You could try and blindly stack one of these golf courses and hope that you can find an edge. But at least to me, I don't know how you would do that, right? Other than just blindly guessing and hope you get it right. So Steven Jaeger, love this stat profile. The event history, let's check that out. Hasn't played here very often, but when he has, finished in T36 last year. 5 years ago, when he wasn't a full-time player, did end up missing the cut. But I'm not worried about 2019 with Steven Jaeger, right? It was just too long ago. He's a much different player at this point. And last year, at least made the cut. So has that working for him. Our next value play is down here at $7,200. So a little bit cheaper, towards the bottom of that 7K range. And we've got Sam Ryder, who is seemingly the perfect course fit. He's number 5 in the field, despite being number 53 in the pricing. And if we go through the event history, he's played damn well here too. So it's not just that the model loves him here, it's that in practice, it's gone very well as well. So over the last 5 years, you can see that he's had 4 made cuts. Now, no real top-end finishes, but Sam Ryder was not that good of a player, right? These last 4 or 5 years. Was not really in the playoffs ever, right? Was hardly keeping conditional status. So for him to have 4 or 5 made cuts is exceptionally impressive, especially when we take a look at the recent form, right? And see just how much of a better player that he's been. If we take a look at the last 36 rounds, he's about neutral with everything but on approach. But on approach, has been unbelievable, right? Gaining 0.8 strokes per round. If you zoom in on his buckets, he's really good from 125 yards and in. And if you take a look at his long iron shots, he's also really good from 200 yards and out. So the one place where you might struggle or be, let's say, tour average out there compared to other players might be with some of those mid irons, but at these different, shorter par 72s, you're not going to have many of those shots. So I like that for Sam Ryder. I like the fact that he's consistently made the cut at this kind of event. And on top of that, if you zoom in on him, right, try and get a picture of what's been happening of late, it's extremely favorable, right? Still gaining 0.7 strokes on approach, slight loser off the tee, which isn't all that much of a concern, right? This isn't an off the tee heavy golf course, but around the green, gaining out there with the flat stick, and compared to a lot of the other players around him, he's been much more consistent, right? I mean, this stat profile over the last 12 is not identical, but almost identical, right, to what we've seen over the last 36 rounds, which is a huge plus, right? Normally, this is a very volatile range. You're not going to find a lot of cut makers down here at the bottom end of the sevens, and you kind of get that with Sam Ryder, right? They've got somebody who's got an extremely high made cut percentage. They're at 61.4%, but that also brings you some top 10, top 5 upside. We've seen it in elevated field events. Really was, it's 2023 where we started to see some of those pop performances, and maybe rather than just a made cut this time, we can get one of those pop performances, right? He's just that level of player now. So I like that for Sam Ryder. I like the trajectory heading into 2024 at a golf course where statistically is one of the best plays on the slate. And a lot of that's because of the POA overseed numbers, because of that approach play that we looked at. But that's 2 of our top stats, right? Birdie or better percentage, right? Another one of the stats we're looking at where Sam Ryder's a lot better than his peers. And now for our last value play, we're dipping down into the 6s, and it's a talented but extremely fiery player. We may have heard that story before, John Rahm, right? Kind of rings a few bells, fiery but talented player. And I've heard people say that Alejandro Tosti is a top 20 talent player in the world, like top 20 official world golf ranking type of player that has the mindset of a prepubescent teenager. So he's $6,800. He hit into a few groups last week because he didn't feel like waiting for them to hit. Hole number 10, I believe it was there on Thursday, hit into the group ahead of him. He knows how far he hits it. Guy's an absolute flusher, one of the longest players on the PGA Tour. He knew exactly what he was doing, and I kind of love that for him, right? Again, an extremely fiery, competitive type of guy out there who a lot of his Korn Ferry Tour peers have said if he had his mind right, would be, again, one of those top 20 players in the world. So I like that for Tosti. He's had a few pop performances at cheap price tags last year. Was one of the Korn Ferry guys that was getting starts on the PGA Tour, and is one of the favorites to win Rookie of the Year. So I love that at $6,800. You can see recent form ranking is number 20 in this field. But it's more so how he gets it done. So if we look at Tosti over here, you'll see he's gaining a bunch off the tee. The approach play is about a 0, but he's really good with the long irons. Has been compared to Emiliano Grillo, another guy from Argentina, in terms of his approach play. And he's a slight loser with the putter. Reminds me a lot of Steven Jaeger. In fact, I would say that Tosti and Jaeger are like almost the same type of player, same type of talent level at this point. I would just say that Tosti has more long-term upside. So we can get him at $6,800. He's going to be relatively low owned on a week like this. And these kind of players aren't going to last, right? I mentioned Adrian Dumont de Chassart, right? And we're not going to talk him up as a value play here, but $6,100 for this sort of player, if he is the kind of guy that people have said that he is, like is $1,000 too cheap. So there's a bunch of Korn Ferry Tour guys down here that you can probably consider on this kind of week. At the top of my list is Alejandro Tosti, and it's just talent level. It's just pedigree when it comes to this sort of play. He strikes me as an extremely volatile player, right? One that's going to have super low rounds, probably going to mix in a few blow up rounds because of the mental challenges, we'll say, with Alejandro Tosti. But I kind of like that, right? I like when they have that competitive edge. I like when my players miss putts and get pissed off, because that's how I feel about it, right? When I'm out there playing, I get a little bit fiery from time to time. And as a watcher, right, when I'm rooting for somebody, they miss a putt, I'm going to feel upset about it. I like when the player feels upset too. It shows that they care, right? Jordan Spieth, I think, is extremely relatable for that reason. So I think a lot of people are going to hate on Tosti. He's going to have a lot of naysayers out here for this year. But he's going to get a fan in me, especially if he goes out there and starts performing like people have those expectations for him. So $6,800, a player that you can consider. But yeah, a lot of these Korn Ferry Tour guys down here, buy them up now, right? They're going to be at much higher stock prices later in the year. And if you want to buy the dip, the time is now. Alrighty, guys, that is all I've got for the preview at the American Express. Before you hop on out of here, go ahead, smash that like button for me, and also comment down below who you've got winning this golf tournament. Now, our free Patreon giveaway is going to be for our course breakdown. So on there, make sure you go ahead, guess your winning score. If you get that right, you'll get a free month of the Patreon. But if you have thoughts on who wins this golf tournament, go ahead and let me know as well. No giveaway on that side. Gonna keep it just to the course breakdown one, but would love to hear your thoughts and who you're maybe getting some outright exposure to this week. Best of luck with all of your bets, any outrights, any DFS lineups that you're entering. Stop by the live stream tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern time, and let's get ready to go out there and crush it for the AMEX. Should be a fun one, some low scores, some prop bets too that should be smashing for some birdie props. Let's go out there and have ourselves a week.